Camera settings are very important with this sort of work. Basically, the more manual settings you can get it on, the better. So I've just switched it from autofocus to manual so that I can set the focus and then it won't change itself. Because looking back at some of my earlier stop motion work, I think up to and including The Prober Succeeded, which I finished in 2009, probably the worst thing about them, technically speaking, was the fact that they were shot on autofocus cameras. They had an autofocus, you couldn't turn it off, there was no manual setting anywhere. And in some scenes in particular, you can see the focus kind of, it's all over the place, jumping in and out like mad from frame to frame. Towards the end of production on The Prober Succeeded, I'd started figuring out some tricks to make the camera do more or less what I wanted with the focus, to the point where right at the end of the film I actually managed to do a focus pull. It was quite fiddly and it did take me years of faffing about to figure out how to do that sort of thing. The focus is definitely an issue in some of my earlier work, but with this, it's especially good with Papercuts in that everything exists pretty much in a plane, so you just set the focus from where the camera is to the paper, and then that'll be it. I mean, depending on the length of lens I'm using, it might be a bit blurry around the edges while the centre's in focus, but it's not really anything to complain about. So yeah, manual focus, the dial on the top of here into manual as well, and then that will force it to use a consistent aperture and exposure time setting. The more consistent you can make that, the better it'll be. I'm also keeping the curtains shut over there to try and limit the amount of natural light that gets into the room, because obviously that fluctuates in ways that you can't control. If you can take that out of the equation, or at least take as much of it out of the equation as possible, then that will make more consistent lighting and smoother photography. Also need to change the image quality setting, because trying to process Nikon RAW files into a video is, well, basically impossible. So I always have to shoot on JPEG mode to do animation. And I really don't need the images to be almost 4,000 pixels across, which is the maximum capacity that this camera does. I found that the smallest setting on the D80 is slightly wider than what you need for 1080p resolution, and a couple of hundred pixels taller, so there's a bit of cropping involved, but it's not too far off. Helps if you take off the lens cap. The other thing that I've found is quite helpful is using the remote control, because you don't apply that much pressure, or at least you don't think you're applying that much pressure to the camera when you press the manual shutter release, but in terms of how precise you want the camera positioning to be to get smooth looking stop motion footage, even just touching the shutter release can actually push the camera that bit out of alignment enough to cause, quite bad shake when you play the footage back. So to get around that, remote control all the way. Pretty much every frame of Papercuts and the Merkham show has been filmed using the remote. This is relatively straightforward stuff. Number of frames I'm getting filmed per minute is quite good, because there's not too much going on between frames. There are going to be other scenes later on in the episode where this slows right down. 2 out of 3 shots in the can for scene 1. The second 2/3 of that bit of dialogue will take place as voiceover during that stage direction there. It's actually about reducing the amount of lip sync I have to do, because if he can be talking while he's off screen, it means I don't have to worry about what you can see his mouth doing, basically being lazy. Overlapping 2 different components of the scene will also mean that it keeps the pace up, which is generally thought of as being a good thing, so it's not just being lazy. another fun fact, that is not an accident. That is actually the range of cutouts which I've got blue tacked up and ready to use in the scene, but not actually attached to the main set at the moment. So there are the bits which have been in the scene earlier, will be in the scene later, or possibly both. But I will admit that from this sort of distance it does kind of look like an accident.
El Capitan, it is ready! But what is it, Pedro? A freeze dryer, senor.